Hey guys, still here and welcome back to Stormworks. Right now I'm on episode 3 of the tutorial guide for starting a new career. This is the basic boat that we've been building over the past 2 episodes. It might look slightly different as I had to rebuild it, but this is the boat that we have. Unfortunately, it is a bit thirsty. This thing takes quite a bit of fuel for every kilometer or every meter that you travel, depending on how you want to look at it. That's going to be today's focus. I want to make sure that this thing doesn't take as much fuel. So we're going to take it back to the workbench, and if you're close enough then you can just generally click R, although you got to make sure to take out the fuel. Now this is for me a sort of throwaway save game, so I don't particularly need to do it, but if you're on an actual career save, pump out your fuel, because it gets expensive. Alright, so previously I had set up this gearbox in episode 2. What I told you about that gearbox currently is wrong, and this is very important. If you want to have the ratios the way that they are currently, then you need to have the gearbox reversed. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I messed up there entirely. These ratios need to be in reverse. So I'm going to reset this gearbox, and the arrows need to be pointing towards your engine, right over there. Now once again, if you swap it around, make sure you reconnect it to the reverse button over there, as well as reconnecting it to the power grid. Okay, we're going to use another gearbox today, because the gearbox is the thing that can make your boat, it can do two things for you. It can both make your boat go faster and make it conserve or make it use less fuel. So we're going to add another gearbox. And you can stash these things one after another. Just make sure you have those arrows pointing towards each other. That's where the entrances and outputs of these blocks are. Again, we're going to have to hook it up to the power grid. And now we're going to set up these ratios. I want this thing to have a different ratio. Because if I were to have it in the current configuration, it would take 1 RPM from the engine and turn it into 1 RPM for the prop. Now this works alright, but that means that the engine is going to be running at, well, best capacity at all times, and at the same time it's going to be using as much fuel as it possibly can. So what I want to do is make sure that this engine has the lowest RPM possible, and that it transfers a low RPM in a high amount of rotations per minute from the propeller. That's where the gearbox comes in. You can consider this a little bit like the pedals on your bike. If you've never seen a gearbox, here's how that works. This first number 1 is how many rotations you make with your pedals. The second one is how many rotations you aim to make with your rear wheel. So on a bike, you have your pedals. With that, you use the chain to connect to whatever gear or whatever rear wheel you have. Ideally, you want to go fast on a bike or any vehicle at that. So you want to have 1 rotation from your pedals, or in this case 1 rotation from the engine, to translate into many rotations from the propeller. So if you switch this to 5 to 6, that means if this one has an RPM of 5, then the propeller back here, and you cannot see it because I'm in the selector tool, this one's going to have 6 rotations per minute. That's a good start, but we can do better. You can go 2 to 3. So I can have 2 rotations there, 3 rotations there. I can have 1 rotation here, 2 rotations there. And finally, I can have all the way at the back 1 rotation here, 3 rotations there. Now you could argue, okay, lovely, why don't you add 10 gearboxes and make sure that this engine is at, I don't know, 0.2? And the prop is turning at about 200. Well, unfortunately, the game doesn't allow you to do that. Depending on the engine that you use, and depending what the settings are that you have, you can usually go up to about 3 gearboxes. For this tutorial, I'm going to keep it at 1. 1 is going to be my reverse/standard gearbox. That's the first one. And the second one is going to be the one that helps me conserve fuel. So I'm going to set this to a relatively low gear, 2 to 3. And this one is going to be higher. So this one means that at standard, if I don't toggle the gearbox on, I'm going to have 2 rotations here, 3 rotations there. This also means that I'm going to be not only using less fuel, but also going faster. If I toggle the gearbox on, it's going to switch to a 1 to 3. That's going to turn the RPM of the engine even lower and get me even more rotations from the prop. Now keep in mind that this engine is experiencing a sort of resistance by the prop. It's trying to turn the prop at best capacity, but at some point it just can't get up to that 20 RPM that the engine can maximally do, or at least that's what we have the engine set up at currently. So what you're going to see is, depending on how many gearboxes you have, a lower RPM. In this case, I'm expecting about 7 or 8 RPM, translating to a lot more RPM from the props. Now, I have added a gearbox. Don't forget to add a toggle button. Where and how you set this up on your ship is, of course, entirely up to you. I'm going to make sure that this is the reverse, and this is the, let's say, the gear up, depending on how you want to call that. Again, make sure you connect that, and we're going to connect the gear up button to the gearbox back there. Spawn it in. Now, of course, we're going to have to bring that fuel connector back on board. Without drowning, preferably. And here we are. Okay. Put that on here. Fuel is full. So we can now take this off. And there you go. Good. So now we can start the engine up. I'm going to start on low RPM or low throttle. Because keep in mind that we're already at a 2 to 3 ratio. So even if I wanted to, I probably won't be able to get up to that 20 RPM for the main engine. But the advantage is that my fuel consumption, and initially it's not measuring anything because it's like the engine's not taking any fuel. But if you give it a minute, there we go. It's now starting to take a bit of fuel, but it's still quite a bit. It's not as much as it was doing, and our speed has improved. Just with this boat as it is, try not to turn it too fast or it will flip over. The fuel consumption is alright, but I want to make it better. Note the RPM is currently 12. So I'm making 12 rotations per minute, and that means that since I'm on a 2 to 3 ratio, the propeller is going to be making 18 rotations per minute. That's what the prop in the rear is doing. I'm now going to enable the gear up. I'm suddenly at 6.6 RPM. My fuel consumption is even lower. I'm taking less fuel, but my boat is going so fast at this point that it's almost coming out of the water. This is how you conserve fuel. Now, this is a very, very basic way of using gearboxes. You can make this as extensive as you like. I've seen creations on the workshop where you have gearboxes which are incredibly complex, where you just have 6 to 8 gearboxes. Now, they're not all active at the same time, but you can make combinations. So you can have one gearbox set at a 2 to 3 and one at a 1 to 2, and try to get the maximum out of an engine. Keep in mind, if this drops too low, the engine will stall, because it's facing too much it's facing too much resistance. Imagine that you're trying to pedal your bike up a steep hill, and you're doing that at the lowest possible gear. So normally, you'd be making very low rotations, or you'd be pedaling very, very slowly in order to go fast if it were a flat road. Try doing that up a hill. It just doesn't work. In that case, you need to throttle down a little. And in this case, it means that you need to gear down. So you just disable the gear button there. And that way, you don't need to pedal as fast. But you will be conserving, or you will be taking up more fuel, of course. This is a very basic way of using gearboxes. Now, again, you can use these and make them far more complex. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the back. Experiment with it. See what works for your creation, because I doubt that you exactly built this type of boat. There are so many different ways to be building boats or creations in this game that it is really hard to just say, hey, this works for everything, because it doesn't. And that's the beauty of Stormworks. Okay, so that's how you do it. Add a gearbox, make sure that it is facing the engine with the arrow keys. Click on it, set it up to a different ratio, and make sure that you have an RPM dial. The one for me is currently on the right, and this way I can track what my engine is doing. And you will also find out if your engine is stalling, yes or no. Have any questions about this? Let me know down below in the comments. Have any specific tutorial requests? Then by all means, again, leave those down below in the description, or sorry, in the comments. In the description, I have a list of further tutorials that you can have a look at, depending on how advanced you are. I will keep adding to these, and if you have any questions or have a question for a tutorial that I haven't made yet, then again, leave that in a comment down below, and I'll get to work. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon for more.